Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Panay, and in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing those tricky situations in which someone asks you desperately to do something that they want you to do for whatever reason, or they ask for something desperately that you don't necessarily want to give. You might think, well, the kind thing to do is to give them what they want since they seem so desperate about it, but you might feel an inner impulse or a real aversion to doing or giving what they have requested. From the point of view of being a Course in Miracles student, what do you do in those circumstances? Well, there's a section in the course that I'd like to discuss where it talks about when your brother asks for something outrageous and it says, do it. Now, this is quite a controversial statement from the Course because usually the Course does not direct us in terms of behaviour. So is the Course out of character here? This is where it is important to look at the Course's overall message to discern what exactly it is meaning when it comes out with statements like this that seem quite specific and directive. I wrote an essay called Outrageous Requests, and it comes from the first volume of my essays called Reflections on A Course in Miracles. And I'm going to read out the essay and discuss here and there some of the major points that it brings up. So let's begin. Outrageous requests. One of the most important distinctions A Course in Miracles makes is between form and content, between what someone says or does, for example, which we would call form, and the ultimate motivation for their actions, which is called content. Without being mindful of this distinction, we can easily misinterpret sections of the Course as giving a prescription for behaviour. A commonly misunderstood passage occurs in Chapter 12 and refers to the outrageous requests of others. Quote, "Recognise what does not matter, and if your brother asks you for something outrageous, do it because it does not matter." End of quote. I heard of a woman interpreting this passage to mean that she should start wearing makeup because her boyfriend asked her to. Cue the familiar parental refrain, "And if they asked you to jump off a bridge, would you do that too?" The Course clarifies the above passage 4 chapters later with the following, quote, "I have said that if a brother asks a foolish thing of you, to do it. But be certain that this does not mean to do a foolish thing that would hurt either him or you, for what would hurt one will hurt the other." End of quote. While this passage seems to clarify the first, it can further muddy the waters if not interpreted within the Course's broader context and message. What exactly does the above passage mean by hurt? Does it mean to be damaged physically? If so, then the harmless act of putting on makeup at someone's request, for example, can seem like the thing to do. But what about other non-physical ramifications? What about the notion of being authentic? If we do something that we don't really want to do, won't we resent it? And won't resentment or suppressed anger eventually come out sideways as anxiety? Yes, it will. The Course's message can only be interpreted helpfully by remembering it is always talking about what goes on in our mind, specifically the judgments we make about others and ourselves. In other words, the Course is concerned with the meaning we attribute to things. Subtitle: Meaning Makers. We are constantly telling ourselves stories about what things mean, why people do what they do, and why we react in a particular way. If we see someone trip on a rug, for example, we might think they are clumsy, or alternatively, that the rug is the problem. Perhaps there is a loose thread or the rug is too thick, thereby posing a hazard. 9 times out of 10, however, we will attribute the cause of misfortune to a characteristic of the sufferer, something psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. When we are identified with our ego, we are indeed primed to judge others harshly. The fact that we are meaning makers and that our inner experience is inextricably linked to the meanings or interpretations we generate, is why the first lessons in the course focus on helping us loosen our grip on our habitual perceptions. The lessons bring home the fact that we have given everything we see a meaning, and these meanings will be based on lessons from our past. We don't, therefore, see anything as it truly is now, because our interpretations are based on past associations, clouding our vision. How many times, for example, has someone totally misunderstood what you've said, becoming offended or flattered when this wasn't intended? In such cases, our actions may have been misconstrued according to that person's past experience. They heard or saw what they expected. Referring back to the issue of outrageous requests, what the Course is asking us to consider is that the meaning behind such a request isn't what it appears to be. In other words, based on the form of someone's request, it seems that they are asking us to do something in particular, and that their happiness depends on us doing what they ask on this level, the level of form. But on the level of the mind, the level of content, they are asking for something quite different, something they themselves are unaware of. The more a person presses us to do something, the more they believe their salvation lies in us doing it. At that point, they have identified with their ego and the sense of lack, deprivation, and insecurity that go with such identification. To identify with the ego is to believe we have separated from God, love, and wholeness. The sense of anxiety and depression that stems from this has us turning to the world for comfort, rather than to our minds where the source of the problem lies. Quote, "To identify with the ego is to attack yourself and make yourself poor. That is why everyone who identifies with the ego feels deprived. He does not realise this. Even if he is fully aware of anxiety, he does not perceive the source as his own ego identification, and he always tries to handle it by making some sort of insane arrangement with the world." End of quote. We get an idea that doing or having A, B, or C will make us feel better, and in the hope of easing our distress, we become heavily invested in getting what we want, even if this means getting someone else to do what they don't want to do. When someone gets what they want on the level of form, however, this doesn't answer their real request to be shown that they haven't separated from love, though they believe they have thrown it away. It is the peace in our mind that remains undisturbed by their choice for the ego and their outrageous request that mirrors back to them the peace and love that remains in their mind, and this is the real source of help. According to the Course, there are ultimately two motivations underlying all behaviour: a call for love or help, or expressing love. As our peace and lack of judgment answers someone's call for help, it reminds them that there is another choice they can make. From this peaceful place, we are able to listen to the guidance of the Holy Spirit and do whatever we feel to do on the level of form. We can say no on the level of form as long as we have answered someone's true request by not judging them. That's the ideal. But what if we do find ourselves reacting strongly to the requests of others? Another subtitle: Our Sole Responsibility. Ideally, we don't answer someone's request on the level of form until we have answered it on the level of content, and we can't do this while we are judging them and ourselves. If we feel an intense reaction to someone's request, then we first need to attend to our mind, becoming aware of anything that would cause us to feel at odds with and therefore separate from them. Feelings of being impinged upon, let down, unconsidered, harassed, along with disgust, fear, or anger, are red flags that there's something for us to look at. We can't answer someone's call for help until we have looked at the judgments which have elicited these emotions and choose to have them corrected or to judge against them. Quote, "You cannot lay aside the obstacles to real vision without looking upon them, for to lay aside means to judge against." End of quote. By looking at our own judgments and choice for the ego, we are able to first forgive ourselves before we forgive someone else, no longer judging them for their own misguided choice. Quote, "The sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself. Once you accept this, your mind can only heal." End of quote. If what someone wants us to do seems to cause us to lose our peace, then it symbolises something to us, something that needs forgiving. In the make-up situation, for example, if the woman was to respond with indignation, "How dare you?" then she could ask herself if she would condemn herself for such a request. Perhaps, for example, she'd harboured a wish that her boyfriend act in a more, or less, refined way, or dressed differently, or had a better, more impressive job, or lost, or gained, some weight. None of these for his sake, but for her own satisfaction. She might not ever have verbalised her wishes, but, like him, she had felt that her happiness depended on her partner being different. Having noticed this, she could ask the Holy Spirit for help to forgive herself for having identified with the ego in the past and present. Alternatively, if she had reacted to the request with depression and emotional withdrawal rather than indignation, chances are she was interpreting things through the lens of the past, of never feeling good enough. The temptation for her then might be to go ahead and wear makeup, but do it with a sense of resignation, having interpreted her boyfriend's request as yet another confirmation of her inherent unworthiness. If, however, she manages to notice her emotional reaction to the request and looks at it with the Holy Spirit, who reminds her of her inherent worthiness, she has the opportunity to use the situation to forgive those in the past she blames for her lack of self-worth, along with her partner for the meaning she'd perceived in his request. In doing this, she'd fulfill her one responsibility, to see the situation through the eyes of forgiveness rather than judgment. Whatever she did or didn't do from this point on would be secondary and wouldn't involve the inner conflict she'd otherwise have felt regardless of what she chose to do in form. In asking for help to see things differently, we create space in our mind to let the Holy Spirit show us the way forward. Then, whatever we feel to do won't be a big deal for us, and it will be in the form through which we both can accept the message of forgiveness and the joining between us, realising that we are both being healed and therefore both gaining. Such joining can happen whether we do the outrageous thing or not. This is what's so hard to grasp when we are focused on the world of form, and is another example of how the course's curriculum represents a thought system that is totally opposite to what we are accustomed to. So, when the course says, "Recognise what does not matter, and if your brother asks you for something outrageous, do it because it does not matter," it is saying, look beyond the form of the request because the form doesn't matter. But the only way we can look beyond the form and answer the call for help behind it is to first notice our judgments. Then we can answer the true request by letting the Holy Spirit remind us both of who we are. As the Course says, we are never healed alone. And that is the end of the essay. Something I'd like to point out in relation to this is the idea of sacrifice. The Course says a lot about sacrifice and how the atonement principle is the idea that we needn't sacrifice for salvation. Salvation is the idea that no one need sacrifice for anyone to gain. And on this, I would like to read out a little bit from the section, The Rock of Salvation, which is in chapter 25. And as we'll see, the rock of salvation is this idea that nobody need lose in order for anybody to gain. That is antithetical to the Course's idea of salvation and the atonement, which is the idea that we have shared interests, that if anybody is to gain, everybody is to gain. And that is the only way anybody gains. If somebody loses, then nobody is a gainer. And this relates to the premise that we are all one on the level of the mind, and we all share that same interest to know of this and to know of our innocent self. The idea of separate interests, of winners and losers, gainers and losers, relates to the ontological split, the belief in that in order for us to do what we wanted to do, we had to separate from God. So there's the idea of separate interests and separate wills, that we don't share the same will as God, that He is some kind of overlord and we want our independence. We want our freedom, and we can only get that sense of freedom from leaving that oneness and being a separate autonomous self. So the idea of separate wills is also related to the idea of sacrifice. God's oneness was sacrificed in order for us to go ahead and go on our merry way as an autonomous being. So this idea of one of the other is at the heart of the belief in separation and keeps being replicated in the world, where we feel we have to sacrifice our interests in order for somebody else to get what they want, or vice versa. And this also plays into the whole special love-hate relationships, all the bargaining that goes on. Well, the course of salvation is the end of sacrifice, end of the idea of sacrifice. So here's this portion from the Rock of Salvation in chapter 25 that I'd like to read out to you. It's from paragraph 12. Salvation is rebirth of the idea no one can lose for anyone to gain, and everyone must gain if anyone would be a gainer. Here is sanity restored, and on this single rock of truth can faith in God's eternal saneness rest in perfect confidence and perfect peace. This is the rock on which salvation rests, the vantage point from which the Holy Spirit gives meaning and direction to the plan in which your special function has a part. I like the way it says the vantage point from which the Holy Spirit gives meaning and direction. So it's from the vantage point of seeing that no one can lose for anyone to gain. So of recognizing shared interests. From that vantage point, the Holy Spirit gives meaning and direction to the plan in which your special function, meaning forgiveness, has a part. And here's another fabulous line. This is from paragraph 13. No one can suffer for the will of God to be fulfilled. So we are not asked to suffer for the benefit of anybody else. This is also the course talks about love and what love is. And the idea that love calls for sacrifice, which is so prevalent in our world and prevalent in the Bible, is a big mistake. Love does not ask for sacrifice. Love does not ask for anything. So the course also is a big re-education about what love is. So it is not loving to sacrifice yourself or have that feeling that you're sacrificing yourself for somebody else. That will always be on the level of form and relate to form. You know, you're doing something you don't really want to do. The course doesn't ask us to do that. The emphasis in the course is not on what we do, but who we do it with. It's on the choice we make within our mind to come from the Holy Spirit's vision or the ego's perception of separate interests and judgment. Whatever we do on the level of form is absolutely secondary. So next time when someone comes to you with a very intense request, an outrageous request, or one in which they desperately feel that you have to give them what they're asking for, otherwise they will suffer, take a moment to go within, ask for help to perceive their request through the eyes of the Holy Spirit and to answer their request through the Holy Spirit. To remember that if anybody is that intense about something, then that's a call for help. And you can't answer that call for help in form, not if you go there first. You can only answer that call for help and your own if you feel at all off kilter after their request by going within your mind to the Holy Spirit to answer the call in both of you, and then be as patient as you can with how that motivates you to proceed. I hope this has been of help to you. The requests come left, right and centre from so many people. If you've got kids, you're probably getting them all the time. But these are opportunities to remember the teacher that we have within our mind, the help, the ever-present help that we have within our mind. And in that respect, the requests, which can seem annoying to an ego, to us, when they keep on coming, can be like, I think of St. Paul when he talks about the thorn in his side. We never know what the thorn in his side actually is. But in the end, he decides, well, actually, the thorn in my side isn't so bad, because every time I feel the thorn in my side, I remember to ask for help. And so I'm glad about the thorn in my side now, because it reminds me of who's with me. That's kind of what he says in my interpretation anyway. With that, I will leave you now, and I hope you tune back in for some more reflections on A Course in Miracles and all that goes along with that. Thank you. Bye.